Hello, my name is Todd Baginski. I'm a Microsoft MVP and the CTO of Canvas Consulting. In this video, I'm going to give you an end-to-end demonstration of the expense report PowerApps sample. The expense report PowerApps sample allows you to submit expense reports with multiple line items. There's also a Microsoft Flow hooked to the back end that sends notifications when you have submitted an expense report for approval, and also sends an email to the person who's supposed to approve your expense report to allow them to approve it. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate all this functionality to you. To begin, after you have installed the expense report in your PowerApps environment, you can navigate to it in the Apps page, like you see here, on web.powerapps.com. Simply click the ellipsis for the row of the Power App corresponding to the expense report and click Open. When you open the expense report Power App, it'll look like this. The first time you open it in your environment, you will not see any data inside of this Power App, but I've added a little bit of sample data to give you a tour of some of the functionality. To begin, at the top, we have a summary that displays the total value of open expense reports and how many there are. So I have one open expense report here, but it does not have any line items associated with it, so its value is currently 0. I also have one, as you can see, pending expense report. The pending status means it's pending approval and it has been submitted. So I have one submitted for $716.78. We also have the approved summary here at the top. There has been one expense report approved for $15. You can click the different tabs here to browse through the different expense reports. So here's the Open tab with the February expense report, the Pending tab, the Approved tab, and then the All tab, which shows me all of the expense reports. We also have a button here that allows you to sort by date. If I click this, you'll notice the dates are now in ascending order, but if I click it, now they are in descending order. So that button allows you to filter, sort the values you see here. Speaking of filters, we also have a date filter. When you click this filter button like this, it opens a new page which allows you to specify the start and end dates that you'd like to filter by. Here I have my start date as January 1st this year and the end date as the end of February this year. If I change this, for instance, to February and apply it, now you can see when I go to View All, I only have one expense report here. However, I still do see the roll-up of all expense reports. So this filter just applies to what you're seeing in the view of the grid here. I'm going to go and change that back to the date I had before so we can see them all again. And now we have all of them in view. I'm going to give you a tour now of what it looks like to add a new expense report and line items to it, and then go through the approval process. To create a new expense report, simply click the plus icon in the top right portion of the Power App. This brings up the Create New Expense Report form. Here I can select which period this expense report applies to. For the sake of this demo, I'm going to use today's date as my expense reporting period, and then I will give it a title. I can also select my approver. Here, when you start typing in names, it automatically looks up in Active Directory the people associated with the name you've typed and allows you to select them. I can also choose my cost center here. These cost centers come from value inside of the SharePoint list that this particular Power App is tied to. When I hit Create, it will create my new expense report. and you can see all the data about it here. If I come back and look at my SharePoint list, I can see the 3 expense reports that I showed you when I originally opened the app. Now that I created a new one, if I refresh the page, I will now see the new list item that I created in SharePoint via the Power App. If I look at the line items in here, you'll notice I have 4 line items for my previous expense reports. I'm going to go add a line item now to my new expense report, and then we'll see it appear here in the list as well. To add a new line item, I click Add New Line Item here. I pick the date which it occurred, give it a description, pick a category for it. These categories also come from the SharePoint list in a choice column where you can specify them without having to write any code and affect which categories people can choose from. I can put in the cost, and if I hit save, it'll take me back to the screen I saw before. If I hit save and add new line item, it will allow me to add yet another line item here very quickly. So I will add in another line item, and this time I'm going to click Save. And now I'm returned back to that expense report. So this is the My PowerApps Expense Demo Expense Report. I'm submitting it on the 22nd today. It has the expense period of the 22nd through the 22nd. However, in your company, maybe you submit on a monthly basis for expenses, or maybe you do it per trip you take. So this period could equal the duration of either one of those. If I wish to edit this data, I can click the Edit button and open back up the form and change those values. If I wish to edit my line items or add more, I can click on one of the line items to edit it, or click on the Add New Line Item to create a new one. For instance, if I wish to edit the cost of my lunch here, I can click on that expense report and put in a new value here. Clicking Update commits that information to the SharePoint list, and now the information is also reflected in the expense report. Now if I go back to the main page here, I can see that I now have another open expense report, and my summary value at the top reflects that as well. I'm going to open back up the expense report I just created, and now I'm going to submit it for approval. Remember, I made the approver myself here so that I can show you the emails that the flow sends out for approval. Next, I will click the Submit button to submit this expense report for approval. Notice as soon as I do that, we now have 2 in the pending category, and if I click on pending, we can now see that the status of this expense report is pending. Coming back to the SharePoint list and refreshing this page, I will see the status column right here from open change to pending. In the line items list, notice we had 4, but I added 2 before as I worked with the Power App. So if I refresh this page, now we'll see a total of 6 line items, reflecting those 2 new line items I created right here today. Notice the report ID, 109 in this case of the one I'm working with. This is a lookup column that goes back to the expenses list, where here I have an ID of 109. That's how we tie the line items to the expenses. After I submit my expense report, a flow kicks off, which allows me to facilitate approval on that expense report. Here's the email that I received from Microsoft Flow to allow me to approve it. You can see it has the name of the expense report and a link to the SharePoint site with that list item, as well as a button to approve or reject it. So I can click on that link, go see more details about it, and then approve or reject it. I can also look at it inside of the Power App before I decide to approve or reject. In this case, I'm just going to approve it. First, I click the Approve button. This brings me to a new web page that you see right here. Here it shows me the detail of this expense report. Again, it gives me a link to that expense report and says I've chosen to approve it. Here I can leave comments about my approval. When I click the Confirm button, that information will be sent back to the flow, and the flow will in turn send an email and also update the items inside of the SharePoint list to mark them as approved. Another email that I received was the fact that my report had been submitted. Here we can see the ID of the expense report, 109, that I've been working with, as you can see right over here again on the right side of the screen. And that told me that my expense report had been submitted for approval. Finally, I have the email here that indicates my expense report was approved. And I also have a link to go straight back to it as well. It also shows me the comments that the approver made to approve my expense report. In the event that somebody had chosen to reject the expense report, I would see their comments here, and the expense report status would move from pending back to open. Returning to the Power App and refreshing the page will reload the data inside of the My Expenses Power App. As we move in here and go to the Approved column, now I can see that my expense report that I just submitted was indeed approved. Opening up the expense report here also shows the comments that the approver made when they approved my expense report. Had it been rejected and set back to open, the comments that person put in when they rejected it would also appear here. Finally, as we look at the SharePoint list here, we can see that the status was pending the last time I looked at this page. If I refresh that page, we can now see that this has been approved. To finish the demo, I'd like to show you the flow that ran behind the scenes to facilitate the approval process. Here we can see the Approve Expense flow. If I pop this into edit mode, I can show you how it works. The flow is kicked off when we submit for approval inside of the Power App. It then uses the Get Items function, or action I should say, to query the expenses SharePoint list and return the items. It then loops through each item and it starts an approval for the item. Here you can see the approval action and the different information that shows up inside of the email. After the approval is sent, then we come back and we notify someone that their expense report has been submitted. Remember when I showed you the email I got that said your report 109 has been submitted? That's how we got the ID in there. Next, we check if the response from that approval process was approve. If so, then we will send an email to say that the expense report has been approved. And so you saw that same email as I demonstrated in the demo earlier. Finally, we will then update the status for that SharePoint list item to approved. And we will also include the comments that came out of the approval action. In the event that the approver rejected it, our response will not be equal to approved, and we will notify the person the same way we did when it was accepted that it has been rejected. And we will then, as I mentioned in the video, change the status of the item back to open and record the comments that were left by the approver. If we close this flow and we inspect it closer, I can take a look at the run that just happened. Here I can see that the flow stepped through all the pieces of the process because they all have the green check mark next to them. And that is how the flow works to facilitate approval of the expenses in the expense report Power App. Thanks for taking the time to watch the video. I hope this Power App comes in handy for you in the real world as well as a learning tool. Thanks a lot.